Thank you all for joining us today for our Staff Week webinar. My name is Meg McClure. I'm NCSL's liaison to the Legislative Research Librarian and Leadership Staff Professional Organizations. Just a reminder that questions can be submitted in the chat box at the bottom left of the screen. I'll pull questions as we go along for Patrick to answer. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Patrick Edgar, Director of the Montana State Professional Development Center, here to talk to us about public service in difficult times. Patrick, take it away.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I know it's good afternoon to some and good morning to others. So what we're going to talk about today is how can we thrive when we're in the middle of downsizing or fending off attacks. One of the things I don't need to tell anybody that works in the public sector, I would think, is that we're constantly either under stress because of criticisms from the general public or people who are in politics or radio personalities and so forth. And that can add a lot of stress to what we do. And the other side of that coin is that at the same time we have to deal with what's called wicked problems. In other words, things that don't present a really easy solution and can be extremely complex. And it's been around for a long time. We've been dealing with what some call cutback management and other terms in the public sector for well over 30 years now. And, you know, it can wear on a public servant after a while. These issues from both a social and a political context. The four focal points that you see on your screen there in the PowerPoint is one that we're going to talk about focusing on the whole system. How do we do that better? We talk about some forms of co-production, more big society issues, people, assets, and so forth cooperating. Then two different ways of looking at public service transformation, increasing our capacity with the same number of people, and then finally, how do we build resilience within our organizations themselves and transform that way. So we do have to consider that in order to do this, in order to take a look at these, that it's not productive or helpful to any of us to just continue to say, well, you know, look, we're here as public servants and everybody should appreciate us. We have to do a little bit more than that. And then at the same time, we have to think about ways we can reorganize. You know, some organizations in the private sector can stop for a while and retool. Manufacturing people can retool. Well, we don't have that luxury. We can't just stop because government services are on. So we see what kind of a strain it causes on people, and they get pretty excited, to say the least. But we also have to be aware of how can we be self-aware and how can we take care of ourselves as public servants. And because sometimes as public servants, because we go into this to make a difference more than to make a million, obviously, sometimes we neglect ourselves and we spend too much time worrying about how we're going to make it better for everybody. How do we learn how to respond to things that come up quickly? Because we're in a fast-moving society right now, and I think everybody knows that. With information technology come up or hit the media or spread throughout organizations, it happens within minutes. And how can we do that? How can we become more nimble? And then finally, how do we tell our story? And is at the same time one of its weaknesses. That public servants, because they're about making a difference, they want to be true servants in the positive sense of that term. Well, there's a sense of humility that goes with that. We're accomplishing what we're actually doing. That the stereotypes about us being wasteful and incompetent and so forth. How do we tell the story in such a way that refutes that negative image that sometimes we suffer under? And with the focus on the whole system. The first part of that is that we can no longer function in silos. That even if we wanted to be honest, we can't stay within our little organization. Asked was to have specialized agencies and offices and bureaus and so forth, and that worked great in the industrial society. It doesn't work in the post-industrial society. Not only because everything happens so fast, control information. I think it's pretty clear to everybody that we can no longer control information. It takes on a life of its own. It spreads rapidly. And how can we move away from the silos and into more net mindset? And how can we think about our results, in toto as public servants collectively, instead of our individual results? And so those two together are ways that we can focus on example of how outward mindset works. And I want you to listen for two different mindsets as I describe this story. There is a video that accompanies this, but I think it'd be quicker for me to describe the story. This is Louise Francesconi. She was a president at Raytheon. And when expected to cut $100 million from their expenditures, from their budgets. And of course, this is an extraordinarily daunting task. And when she got her management team together, of course, each one of the cuts, but if they had to make cuts, this is what it would look like. And the way she describes it is it was really painful. That each person was hand-wringing and saying, oh my goodness, we can't get anywhere. And so the whole morning went on like this, everybody giving their report. Well, somebody from Arbiter Institute, which is where I'm licensed through that group as well, asked her if she could let them do it a different way. And they suggested, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to pair up, and it doesn't matter who you pair up with. And each person telling the other one about their challenges, what they're trying to accomplish, their objectives, and the other person just listen. And then the next hour, what I want you to do after each of the pairs help. What kind of resources could you share? What kinds of skills might you provide that could help the other person? And what happened, she describes, was nothing short of a miracle. It was amazing that at the end of the hour, it felt like they had really given up much of anything. That they didn't actually have to cut them. They had found those kinds of savings just through that kind of sharing. So if you think about it, the first part of that meeting was from an inward mindset. So let's look at two organizations. The first organization operates from an inward mindset. And if you look at the figures on the slide, you can see that these triangles are inward toward each person. And what's going on with these people in this inward mindset organizations. And that's whether it's a department, a bureau, or even individuals alone. How can I survive in the workplace? How can I be successful? How can I advance, and so forth? But everything is about equal objectives. Whereas with the outward mindset organization, you can see it's quite a different picture. You see that the triangles point outward toward the other members of the organization. Each person thinks, can I do my job in such a way that's more helpful for that other person that the triangle is to? But there's another feature here that's rather interesting, in that if you look at the inward mindset organization, they have these boxes around them. Because what's happening is they're closing themselves off from realizing what's going on with those around them. And this is a very real thing. And how it happens over time by what are called self-betrayals. At some point I think I should be helping another person. I have some information they can use. I have a resource they can use. But then I don't do it. It doesn't matter the reason that a person doesn't do it. What matters is what happens next. After I don't do it, after I betray what I know I should do, then I want to justify it. So what I start thinking is maybe about the other person. Well, why don't they have information already? Why aren't they innovative enough or competent enough to have that information? Well, why should I enable them? Why should I have to do the work? So what happens, seeing them a certain way, you start seeing yourself a certain way. Well, that's where the box forms. Now keep in mind, the other person hasn't done anything. It's just that education is so important. That's what makes the process. But over time, this becomes a practice because it forms a collusion. And so when I think of the other person that way and think of myself as kind of the victim and why should I enable, well, they see my behaviors as a result of that. And what happens is they do the very things that I want to do. Whereas with the outward mindset organization, there's more time spent being curious and learning more about the other person's challenges and for opportunities to be helpful. Okay. Why is that not moving? Why is that not moving? Could you advance the slide, please? Oh, okay. So which organization was successful, likely to be more successful? Well, I think most people would say, well, the outward mindset organization. Which organization is likely to be more collaborative? Obviously, the second organization. Which organization more satisfactory or satisfying work culture? Again, the outward mindset. And you can, in the first organization, what is it that these people are primarily thinking about? Well, they're thinking about their own. What is it the people in the second organization are thinking about? Primarily our results, the collective results. And then finally, which organization will deliver more value to customers, or in our case, to citizens? And clearly you could see it's far more likely the second organization is going to do that than the first. But the point of the outward mindset organization is that we literally have to change our mindset and simply the ways we see the world around us, the way we think about our jobs, the way we think about our challenges, and so forth. Think about it in terms of the collective needs and not our own individual needs. Remember, this isn't just individuals. This includes groups, because sometimes what will happen is groups will get into these boxes and close themselves off from others, and it happens without you even realizing it. It just, over time, these things form. And the idea with the outward mindset organization, we have to break that down. Let me go back. So we have to get out of these boxes. We have to move toward this outward mindset thinking and figure out ways that we can be more helpful to others. That's really the key. So there's a whole body of work, by the way, out there on this topic. If you get a chance to the book, it's called Leadership and Self-Deception. That will tell you a lot more. this concept, and we have a 2-day workshop that we use to teach people how to do this. When we talk about co-production, this is another aspect of where we have to start going, and it really doesn't matter what branch we're in. What has to happen is we have to figure out ways to engage citizens in far more collaborative ways than what we have typically done. Typically, the legislative process takes place, laws come out, we develop policies around the law, and then we publish the policies. We come up with all kinds of procedures to carry that out. And unfortunately, when we do it that way, not that that's wrong, but one of the things that tend to happen is citizens will start to feel that government is something done to them instead of with them. And we see it all the time. We see times where maybe we say we're going to have a public meeting. What happens is we get people in a room. We have lots of information, and it's because we're the experts on this topic, and we worked a long time on it. So we give this great presentation, and then we try to look at it to the public and say, what do you think? Well, to them, they feel like we've already decided without them being involved in it all. So how can we do it differently? Well, one of the ways that we can do it differently is use the technology in a way it's really designed to be used. Technology that we have now is not used as so much as to push out information, which is our normal way of doing things, as it is to draw in information. That maybe we get people involved in ideas, generating ideas much earlier on in the process. And there are some interesting things happening in many local governments especially, and many state agencies I know are experimenting with these. But even something like creating a crowdsourcing option where you say, well, here's an issue that we're trying to work on. How about people just kind of participate in this thing and they offer their ideas and talk amongst themselves in this platform? Maybe even doing something as creative as using a wiki, where you'd start off with a problem statement and start addressing the problem and even designing policies as they go on, and then each person can come in and make changes to the policy or the procedures that they're talking about. One of the great accomplishments or successes in recent years was a contrast between Encarta and Wikipedia. If you remember Encarta, and it would be pretty good if you do, because this was the traditional way of doing things. We're going to contact experts. These experts are going to put entries for a new online encyclopedia, and we'll pay them for their time, and this will get the best information. Well, it really never happened. It never worked. They couldn't get all the pieces in. But the Wikipedia idea had another idea. So we're just going to open it up, and anybody can participate. Anybody can contribute entries, or they can change entries as you go along. And, of course, Wikipedia is an enormous success. And I know early on when I was a professor, I didn't like it as a resource. I thought, oh, no, this is terrible. It's, everybody's putting stuff in. Well, now we recognize that it's one of the most accurate sources of information because the people who are experts in that particular area, whatever the topic is of the entry, are constantly monitoring the entries that they care about. And if somebody puts false information in there, they quickly change it. That's pretty amazing if you think about it. But remember that all the people that contribute to this thing aren't being paid a dime. So people would engage in this kind of an activity. And think what that would be like if we had that going on during policy development, even initially, that more people would know that they had a part in it. And government is something that I'm doing with the agencies instead of having it done to me. That's the whole idea behind co-production in the 21st century. Look at this table when it comes to where we are in terms of citizen participation. Now, I know these numbers are from 2014, but they haven't really changed a lot from everything. And how many people have contacted an elected official? Well, you can see as you're a little bit older, you're more likely to, but still, best we can do is 26% of people have ever contacted an elected official. And then you get into the local public meeting, more than twice or 2 times a week or more, or you can see hardly anybody. Attended 2 to 4 local public meetings, you still have hardly anybody. Attended any kind of a public meeting once a month or less. So during the whole year, did you attend one at all? Well, look what happens. The best we can do is 30%. Look at that last column. It says did not attend a local public meeting at all. Well, look at the numbers you have there. I mean, now the highest number is 89%. That's a little bit sobering, and that's not healthy for our democracy. So that's why coming up with different ways to engage citizens is so important. Right now, not only do we have terrible voter turnout rates, I mean, we get excited about 60% of the people showing up to vote, and most of us know that's the best we can do, and that's all presidential elections. As a rule, if you get down to some of the state and local elections, the numbers are really dismal for participants. And that's just the voting. These are really important because who is it that's really complaining about us a lot and so forth, and where do we hit it? Typically people who aren't really getting involved. And so how can we address that? Those are just a couple of suggestions. So how about legislative services? How do they improve their involvement with the citizens? Can they do it? How can you do it? So the groups that I met with now, when they talked about it, and I would certainly invite all of you to talk your own groups within your own states, what kinds of things could we do in terms of citizen engagement that might improve involvement? Maybe coming up with ways like wikis, crowdsourcing, maybe just opening things up for them to input in whatever ways. We know the public meetings don't really draw the numbers, so what else can you do? And by the way, what can you do now? It's like, what kind of technology do you already have available? Sometimes we have far more technology to us than certainly we're using, and sometimes that we're even aware of. So maybe that's a step that any of the groups would want to take is, okay, what do we have in the ways of technology for pulling in information, for pulling in involvement? We know that sometimes, how about apps, on mobile phones, the idea that smartphones have these capabilities for apps for them to interact. Are we tapping into that? And then the other question, of course, the final question is one that would be for each one of you, each of your states, well, what would we like to do? And I suggest that you think of this in terms of the sky's the limit, that you don't cut off any creative ideas because you just never know what's going to come out of there. That when we talk about things like goal setting, looking forward, how about this is a different way of looking forward? How about imagine that you're a year or 2 years from now, and you're going to write an evaluation of how things have gone. What kinds of things would you be writing in this evaluation that happened in the past year or two? You would highlight, here are these great accomplishments that we did in the last year or two. And instead of trying to look forward and imagine, well, what can we do? What do we want to do? How about looking backwards, imaginary? So put yourself in the latter part of 2018 or 2019 and say, okay, what story would I be writing? A great way to prompt ideas. Because I can tell you many times when I've worked with groups trying to help them to set goals, it becomes a rather painful exercise. Or the whole strategic planning endeavor. I don't know what your experience has been, but mine has been that they get together in our groups. We spend a day of brainstorming, and then the rest of the day wordsmithing, and then we have what we call a plan, then the next time we see the plan maybe is a year later when we have to do that. And so is that really focusing our energies? This just might be a technique that might help you focus your energies even a little bit more. Now, some of you might be really great at doing the planning things, and I say, wonderful. Take advantage of that. Use that skill that you have to find ways to reach out to a little bit better than you're already doing. How about doing more with less? Okay, and I'm talking about this idea of cutback management and doing more with less for a long, long time. And the vast majority of states, we've been enduring this for, gosh, at least 35 years. I know that I was working on this before I was even writing my dissertation. We were looking at cutback management and how do we do this more with less. And it doesn't get any easier, does it? It seems to, in fact, get harder. And some of us who have been around for a little while, I think we get a little numb to it. Well, there's some material out there that I think is a little helpful, or maybe even a lot helpful. Some of it comes from Ken Miller's book called Extreme Government Makeover. Many of you are probably already familiar with Ken Miller's work. But what does he talk about? He talks about looking for ways to get the kinks out of the pipes. Where are there opportunities, for example, for us to find shared resources? I mean, do we all have to have our own set of resources, our own printing services, our own computer services, IT services, whatever it is? Or are there ways that we can share resources, similar to what Louise did with Raytheon and what they found? Can we do that? Can we move toward an outward mindset and find resources that we can share for expand capacity in that way? Letting go of old practices. So sometimes our old practices, they've come about over the years for one main reason. They came about over the years because of CYA, and I think everybody knows what that means. But protecting ourselves. You know, something happened 20 years, really went wrong, it was really unpleasant, and so we're going to make a policy or a process so that will never happen again. Not bearing in mind that, well, you know what, it may never happen again anyway, or is that really relevant anymore, and can we let go of that and say, okay, we did that before, and now we have piled on each other all these processes that we put in place, so that none of these terrible things will happen. Well, the irony is, now because of all those processes we put in place, more terrible things are happening, that we can't get things done as quickly as we did. One of the examples he cites is that he worked with a Department of Revenue when it came to income tax refunds. And when they started the process, it took 3 months for people to get their refunds. Because of all kinds of checks and balances and procedures. And they just started looking into those and getting rid of the ones that they didn't need, look for opportunities for shared resources, look for ways that they could refocus their resources during times of high demand, and certainly people would come to mind. They were able to reduce that time down to less than 2 weeks for people to get their refunds. And they were able to actually reach a little further after that because there's one thing suddenly they didn't need. They didn't need a big phone room to answer all the questions of people calling in saying, where's my refund? Because they were getting the refund to make that call. And so they were actually able to drop it down with direct deposit and so forth to around a week. That's pretty amazing. And we've got lots of stories like that. But the idea of letting go of old practices was a big one of how they were able to get there. And then when do we decide something is enough? We want to try to cut out all kinds of what we think is waste and abuse and so forth. But you know, when you get cutting it out, it's costing you more than what you're saving. You know, in the private sector, in the retail industry, they do this all the time. They allow for things called shrinkage. So much product walks out the door. And they say, well, we build into our business plan that we're going to have a certain amount of shrinkage, And to try to get it lower than that will cost us more than what we're losing. So it's just an interesting thing. Now, it's a little harder for us to do that in public service because, we are stewards of the taxpayers' money, and it sounds a little bit nonchalant or maybe even careless, but is it really? Are we just missing an opportunity to find where there's enough and not get too caught up on being perfect? And then how can we change our own attitudes about how we go about dealing with change? How do we go about dealing with the public? And how about when we interact with folks that are making the decisions above us, legislators, governors, and so forth, and say, okay, can we not look at them as a competition and look at them and say, well, what's their perspective? That's kind of an extension of the outline set thing, is that, okay, maybe I should spend a little bit more time learning about what's going on with them, what they think about it, and a little less being defensive. So the one way that we can start to change our attitude is start with self-awareness. Okay, can you, for example, figure out where you live right now? And what I mean by that is, are you really creating the stress that you have, or is it real? What we know about stress. Almost all stress in human beings is self-imposed, it's created. That other species, for example, they have a mechanism like we do when they're in danger. And it shuts down a particular part of the brain, and it goes fight, flight, or freeze thing. But when the danger is over, they turn that off, and they go back to normal way of operating. Human beings have this wonderful need to imagine. And so what we do is somehow we imagine that there's danger all around us. And we all tend to do it. We start to think about what could go wrong in the future. What could go right? How about instead of dwelling on the fact that all these terrible things could happen, that instead you say, oh, look at all these wonderful things that could happen. How about even spending a little still time? How about being still for just to calm yourself down and to realize that that you're okay. And I'm not talking about the self-esteem stuff where we go around and kid ourselves into saying I'm okay, but how about what am I grateful for? Because that's a part of that. And I'm surrounded by folks that don't necessarily do that. And maybe we don't even give ourselves time to do that. And that's kind of sad, because if we're not grateful for the things that we do have, then we will just start to see the doom and gloom all around us, and that's all we can see. So what are we contributing every day? And sometimes just being aware of how much you are contributing to the well-being of your community, of your organization, would help you improve your attitude. And then finally, we have a basis to understand and evaluations and contributions of others. How about a synthesize that you could do in your own group, in your own office? Why not sit down and write down on small pieces of paper something that you appreciate about all that you work with, and put stacks on a table someplace for each person that you write that for. And then at the end of the day, everybody can go and collect their stack, read it. Watch what happens to your group when they realize that people do appreciate them. The creative juices will flow, the more attitude will, and you'll be better problem solvers, and also probably get along a lot better. So this idea of being mindful, and I'm sure many of you have heard the term. So here's one of mindfulness. It's simply being aware of what is happening right now without wishing it were different. It's unpleasant without holding on when it changes, which it will. being with the unpleasant without fearing will always be this way, which it won't. The idea, of course, is that wherever we are, this moment will pass. And are we okay? And rather than looking next moment with dread, how about looking at the next moment with gratitude? It's another opportunity to do something great. And then how about increasing our creativity? So now if you're mindful and you're able to live in the present and also understand that you constantly have opportunities, doesn't that invite creativity? And if we're going to be truly creative, it spends some time thinking about what problem. Okay, what is the problem that I want to work in? And it could take a little bit of time to get right down to what it really is, because sometimes we think we know what it is when we don't. And then let it go for a while. Okay, just say, okay, now I'm going to put that aside. And I'm going to allow some time to pass using some mindful techniques of being quiet, maybe getting up and walking, come up with some physical activity, and then so recognizing that time for going. Seeing ourselves not as human beings, but as human doings. Then we really don't give ourselves time to be creative and to solve the problems. And so that would bring us to the point of how activation of creativity comes when we let it. Sometimes, many of us, for example, if you were either preparing for a test or let's say you had to write a paper and you find that you've got writer's block, doesn't it seem that the more you try to focus on it, the more you try to think, it will just happen? Obviously, you can't let it happen, sit there forever waiting for it to happen. But you know what? You can give it some time so that those creative ideas can come on their own, because they will. Now, how do we build resilience? I want you to imagine two circles, concept circles, that what are the things that I'm concerned about around me? And there's an infinite number of things that we could put into that circle. But there's a much smaller circle in the middle of that circle, and that's called the circle of influence. One of the circle of influence, and not get caught up in those ones that are outside of the circle of influence in the circle of concern. That it is an act of letting things go, but knowing what things that I can't. Unfortunately, in our culture, we look for the negative. Even when I teach classes on doing performance management, and you talk to managers, what do they start talking to me about right away? They start talking to me about their problems with employees instead of saying, gee, I can tell you pretty much all this is sudden quiet in the room. Saying, let me think. Well, gosh, why aren't you aware of this already? And so it's so easy for us to look at what's wrong. But can we spend more time making things right instead of trying to correct what's... And what that means, if you think of the word, can I be a passion with? So when I look at another person, I understand that they have hopes and dreams and challenges and headaches just like I do. Every single person in our organizations, because if you think about the kinds of strains that come, especially from outside so many times, isn't that what we really need for each other? And then, of course, tied back to that creativity thing, but all people in our culture, I would say, this is a tough one. I know I've had to learn this myself. I've had experiences where somebody said, okay, we want you to go and sit in this room and you're going to be quiet. My first reaction was, oh, please shoot me now. I can't do that. That's going to totally kill me. But I did learn how to do that, and I found great value in this ability to be still, to really just be aware of what's around me and where in a certain amount of time. And can I get those regulated so that they're even? Just doing that will help you be still. And that will be some of your most creative and resilience-building moments that you'll have in any day. I would be amazed at how much that replenishes your energies. So now I'm going to give plenty of opportunity for questions because, quite frankly, I cover a lot of material in a very short amount of time. So
it's just a reminder that if you do have any questions for Patrick, you can type them in the chat box at the bottom left of the page. I know sometimes it can take a little bit for it to be.
Since what if your organization has a mix of inward and outward mindset? Well, that's what I would expect in most organizations, that they would have a mix. And what we're going or sometimes you call it the tipping point, that you have enough people in your organization with an outward mindset that it will influence the whole organization, that it will kind of roll into the rest of the organization. And surprisingly enough, that number is relatively low. It's only the change mindset thinking to influence the rest of the organization and to have the rest of the organization start to pick up on it. That I know many people, when they take the workshop, they say, well, yeah, I'm going to do all these great things, and I'm going to, my initial response is, it doesn't matter, because it will be healthier for you to be the outward mindset thinker, and you just stay with it and know that that's what you're doing. It's really, really hard for the people around you to remain in. And so it's something that requires a little bit of patience. But the most important thing that we have to bear in mind is that it really won't matter what the others do. Again, Louise has a story where she was in a collusion where they were going through this giving a talk on this very concept of the outward mindset. And she realized she was locked into this collusion where she was thinking that he was trying to push her around and he was just out for his own thing, and she was out for her own stuff. And was willing to be curious, willing to be helpful to those around me. And I don't know if he changed or not, but I do know that it changed for me, and it changed for everybody around us. The next question that at any given time, anyone is a leader. Okay, it's not a positional thing. It is a behavioral thing. And so, if I take on that leadership, if you want to look at it that way, I don't like to look at organizations that way, but I know many of us do, you're still going to have influence on the people around you. The leader is the one willing to step out, the one to say, okay, this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to model a different. I have an influence around me, and so is it helpful for the top people to be involved? Certainly it's helpful, but it's not a requirement. It can be people on the bottom, people in the middle, people on the top. It will still have a change. It will still change. It may at what starts to happen all around you. For some people, the outward mindset material is sometimes they think it's pie in the sky, or kind of a world. That if that's where I live, if that's what I'm doing, then I expect to see, that it will happen around me. I start says, do you see this transformation to outward mindset and mindfulness as being organic? Or are there structured ways to help facilitate training or other ways to help it spread? We do this that I bring the group through because one of the greatest challenges of this idea and moving organizations in this direction is that we're talking about other people. In fact, there's one really great video that we use where somebody says, well, I read the book on leadership and self-deception, and I was really excited because I finally figured out what was wrong with everybody else, their actions with others, that it was him. That he was the one that was inward thinking, and that until he changed, until he stopped his inward mindset, it wasn't going to happen around him. And so that's one of the things we. And then the second thing is, are there tools? And there are tools that we provide in the training to help them move toward outward mindset thinking, toward evaluating ourselves that way. So we use a form of accountability that says, task that I was assigned, but am I doing things in such a way that's helpful to those around me? And how do I know this? And there are ways that we have some team building techniques that we use so that people actually go through a process. I would like to be able to say that it's organic, and I suppose it could be, but somehow we have to get the concepts down fully first to have, because I would be less than honest if I didn't say, you know what, when you first start trying it, people are going to wonder what's up. Why are you asking me these kinds of questions? Why are you acting this way? And so it throws them off. There's another person that says, I don't know what kind of Kool-Aid you gave this guy. But then he said, later on I realized I wanted some of it. So initially people are going to be thrown off a little bit, again, because most organizations are, in fact. So one comment is like what I said about I can be the change we want to see in the future. Absolutely. In every one of these issues, in terms of, how do we make the best of public service and see in the future, what kind of organization will I be? Well, it's the one that I'm going to create. That organization is not something that's done to you. Something that's done by you. And, this is challenging on so many levels. And we'll take some risk-taking. Boy, there's something that we don't like to do in public service. That would be it, right? Risk-taking. But, and I wouldn't try to mislead you and say, oh, this will be easy. It will be difficult at times, but it will also be worth it. That's the real bottom line. And I have seen it work. Some have asked me in the past, I've actually seen this done. Have you actually seen the results that you're talking about? And the answer is yes, absolutely. That I've seen it in large organizations and I've seen it in small organizations where they increase capacity, They went more to an outward mindset. They found that they were not only able to work better together, but they found creative solutions. It really affected the bottom line. They saved a lot of time, a lot of effort, because they went it this way. You would think that, well, boy, if everybody just had their head down and they were really doing a good job, that we'd be really productive. What we find is that's not true, because all the opportunities to be more helpful around you are missed. The thing I do like to, I see a comment, and I do appreciate back saying that I'm doing more with less. There really is ample opportunity to do more with less, and we don't have to suffer in the meantime. That there are ways that we can find to be with each other. Again, one of the other techniques that we talk about in that context is what we call the meet, and that is sit down with somebody that you work with and just ask them about their objectives, what are their challenges, what are their headaches, and your only job in that conversation is to learn as much as you can in that amount of time. Don't start inserting your stuff and say, well, you think you have troubles, look at mine. Just spend your time listening and try to understand as much as you can where that person is in terms of their challenges and their objectives, and then think about ways that you might be able to be helpful. But the key here is try to be helpful for somebody without asking them first what it is that they need, what their challenges are. Seen that where people say, oh, I'm very helpful. I go around and do these things for other people. And you find out all those other people don't get helpful at all because you didn't ask them first. You really need to ask them first. That's one of the great keys to all of this. So let me finish with a couple. It really, really is challenging times to be a public servant in so many ways. But you know what? It's a noble vocation. And I hope that everybody that listens can hold their heads high and say, you know what? I'm saying without you. A distinguished colleague of mine, George Frederickson, told me many times, I've never met a true public servant that I did not like. Well, I agree with George. I feel exactly the same way. That while maybe not everybody else know what it takes, I know that I would challenge my graduate students when I was running an MPA program to, be prepared to go out there not only to make change by your efforts, and even if people don't see it, know that you're doing it. And again, I think that's a great way for self-care at the same time that we can start to be mindful. And by the way, the answer is, of course we can. We would probably learn a great deal if we did the same kinds of questions with them. Are there any other reactions, questions? If there are questions, you can still contact Megan or that are interested, that want to think about this a little bit more. It is always my pleasure, I humbly say, to work with public servants of all kind. I've been in public service now for 48 years, and I don't intend to stop anytime soon because and if I stop feeling that way, it would be time for me to stop doing what I'm doing. For connecting and listening, I know it's really hard to listen for an hour. That would be a question for Megan.
Thank you very much, Patrick. We really appreciate taking your time to talk to us today. And thank you all for joining us for our webinar at ncsl.org. Thank you all very much.
Okay, well, thank you all, and I hope to see and hear you again.